Thanks, Teresa, and thank you, Northern California Botanists. And even though I'm an introvert, I am so excited to be with my tribe today. We did a full-day workshop on vegetation and environmental review at the last CNPS conference, and so I'm not going to be able to do anything but hit the highlights of that. But we will have time for questions. What I want to do is talk about the considerations and the sources of information for when you're doing environmental review, because that's where we get a lot of questions. And then what to do in unmapped and mapped areas of the state, or classified. People have asked us about how we rank the rarity, and I'll go into that. And then at the very end, just talk about what's going to happen with natural communities that are in CNPS. All photos are by Todd Wolf, except for noted. So the first place to start is with our CDFW protocols for surveying and evaluating impacts of special status, native plant populations, and natural communities. This was updated in March 2018. There's a lot more information about natural communities, including the fact that now we're calling them sensitive natural communities, in part because that's the term that's used in the CEQA appendix, the checklist. So the main points here are that we would, and a lot of people would appreciate if you would use, if you'd identify all the communities on your project site and adjacent to it and use the state classification. And I really want to thank Teresa for being such an advocate of that and seeing the benefits of our state classification. The next thing is evaluate all those natural communities, and not just on the site, but adjacent to it, and then put those in your local context. For example, do any of those communities, even if they're not sensitive communities, do they have significance for local tribes, for example, for cultural uses? Look at the cumulative impacts locally, because your local plans may have some policies regarding that. I know Santa Barbara does. And then put the vegetation in the context of wildlife. What wildlife use those associations or alliances? And you can use CWHR for this, but please crosswalk back to the state classification, because that's how everybody knows what you're talking about. And so where do you find information on sensitive communities? Oh, I was going to skip this one because Jennifer made this plug. If you want to know about the local context of rare communities, talk to your local fish and game person, Jen or Mike Manhattan up here, Gordon Luppig. Amy Henderson. So the natural communities lists are on VegCamp's website. We fairly recently updated them, October 15th. We have them in several forms. One is a list of all the communities, and one is a list of just the rare natural communities, the sensitive communities. We're getting used to saying that too. So, as you probably know, we consider the communities that are sensitive to be ones that have a rank of 1, 2, or 3. And what we've done in this list is we have the rankings for the alliances, but because we have not gone through the rarity calculator, which I'll talk about later, for a lot of the associations, we just say yes or no. And so that means it's a 1, 2, or 3. Jen went over a lot of the tools in the toolbox that we have to protect natural communities, and so, and that would take probably another half hour. So I would just say go to our websites, and particularly the CNPS website, because they'll have everything in one place. And those are discussions of the laws and regulations that relate to sensitive communities. And then we also have sample comment letters from CDFW regarding sensitive communities. And those will give you guidance about what kinds of things you can bring up and how to present evidence. So here's the map that Teresa flashed and Jen flashed, a little more simplified. These are the areas of the state in green that we have either mapped or we have just classified, or they're in progress for sampling. So right now we're working in the Modoc Plateau with money from Amy Henderson in Region 1, which we really appreciate, with money coming from our wildlife branch. And we are classifying the data that we collected many years ago in the southern foothills, and we'll be starting to map the southern foothills soon. And then in the southern, the coastal Southern California, we are taking all of the classifications and all the data that we have, about 10,000 plots, and we are reanalyzing that. So we should have a new, probably slimmed down classification for Southern California, which, I'm sorry, but you know, we really want to work in Northern California. It's just, we've had to follow the money. You know, the Central Valley was DWR, the deserts for the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan was BLM money, and a lot of this stuff in Southern California was HCP and NCCP money. So shout out to Sonoma County. Mark Techman's going to talk next. They did fundraising on their own, and they are also going to start working on San Mateo and San Francisco, or Marin counties. So, in the mapped areas, look to the CNPS Online, or CNPS MCV Online, for descriptions of the vegetation types. The MCV Online has all the updates since the last printing, if you didn't know that, and it's easily searchable, which is nice. We also have maps of all the maps that meet state standards on BIOS, CDFW BIOS. And here's a little screenshot of it. Sorry you can't read it, but if you search for vegetation, all the vegetation maps will come up and be displayed. You'll also get a very limited set of attributes when you click on a polygon, but that will include whether it's rare. To get the full attributes, which include the structural, the environmental data, you'll have to go and just download the data set, and you can do that right from BIOS. The metadata that you can read on BIOS also has links to the vegetation and mapping reports for all of these projects. And that's where you will also find descriptions of the associations. And I want to thank Julie Evans, my co-producer here. She came up with a slide from the Drisa area, which is the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation down in the Mojave. And in areas that are already mapped on the regional scale, like our maps, it's important that if you're looking at the project level, you need to map at a smaller scale, which is a larger scale. So here's an example from the desert, and there was I believe 10 acre minimum mapping unit because the area was just so huge. And for wetlands and other special riparian areas, it was a half an acre. But we also have a minimum width to address. And so if you look here, you can see uplands, the mountains to the west or to the east, and then the desert washes coming down in the drainages. And so this was what the map looked like using the minimum mapping units for this regional map. And you can see that most of it is upland, the tan, and then the riparian washes are outlined in blue. And here it is again. And you can see that even going upstream from the blue polygons, there's still more riparian areas, and that's because they're below MMU. And this is why you will need to map at a much finer scale on your project site. So what do you do in Northern California, or most of it? Well, we had taken the Holland classification off of our website because we wanted everyone to move to our system. And we got so many complaints. So backed by popular demand, Holland is now on our website. We even have a searchable Excel file that you can download. And it's appropriate to use the Holland types in areas that aren't mapped. And even if it's not mapped over, you still should look at the Manual of California Vegetation to see if there's at least an alliance that describes what you have on your project site. Then you can use it. So now I want to talk about how we rank the rarity of communities. And NatureServe has what's called a ranking calculator, and this has been vetted over many areas. You can rank communities, you can rank species. It's what the CNPS uses to rank plants and animals. And so we just started fairly recently ranking communities using this ranking calculator. It looks at the distribution and the area occupied. It looks at threats, and then it looks at trends. And so for the aerial extent, that counts for about 70% of the ranking, and that's because that really tells you how, kind of the baseline of where you're starting as far as rarity. The threats count for 30%, and then the trends are either added or subtracted from the total, if they're not. So here's an example of the Arctostaphylos nummularia association that we just described from this last project that Teresa was talking about. And this is what the rank calculator from NatureServe asks for as far as distribution and numbers of occurrences. And if you look at the large blue polygon, that's what's called the convex hull. It describes the entire area where it's known. The lower polygon that's cut off is for the entire alliance that goes down to Arctostaphylos sensitira habitat and Point Reyes. So we put in the polygons that we've mapped, and then we look at where we've sampled. Perhaps we haven't mapped because it was below MMU. And then we also look at occurrences in CalFlora or the consortium. And because some of those might just be occurrences of the plant and not the actual community, we look on the imagery and see if it could be forming stands there. And that's an example of one of these collection points that actually turns out to be a stand of this Arctostaphylos nummularia. So this information is then archived, and we keep the shapefiles for review later. Here's the threats for Arctostaphylos nummularia, and we put in the scope of what we think the threat is. In this case, say development. We thought it is affecting approximately 11 to 30% of the occurrences. The severity, we think where it's happening, development, there's a severe decline. And then the calculator puts in that medium threat. And you can see for climate change, the bottom one, we think that the loss of fog is going to affect this plant or this community. And so we've said it's going to be pervasive. It will affect most of the occurrences, but we don't know if it's going to be serious or slight. And so the calculator gives it a high to low. And here's the calculator. I don't expect you to read this, but the point is that all of our data that we collect and put into those rankings gets summarized here. And we are archiving this too so that anybody can look at it and challenge or help us modify it. Okay, so what are we going to do with the CNPS occurrences? They're still hanging out there. They're Holland types. And we have a person in our program now, Raquel Englander, who is going over each of the 2,500 occurrences one by one and looking at them to see if they're either likely extirpated or if they can be validated with our mapping. So here's an obvious one. This was northern Arpan vernal pool, obviously not there anymore, and so we're going to remove that from the layer. Here's one that's not so easy. It's Great Valley mixed riparian forest, and that's the Holland type. But we have mapped this area now. Actually, the Geographical Information Center here at Chico has done it. And we mapped it to the alliance level, and here's what the map looks like. So you can see that there's more alliances here. Most of these are also rare and sensitive. We are also saying this point is validated because we have those black dots there, which are field points where we've actually collected data. So what we'll be doing is taking the points that, or the occurrences that are no longer there or have been validated, we'll take them out, and then we'll put a layer on BIOS of the remaining CNPS occurrences. So please, for now, use CNPS, but when we're done, there'll be a separate BIOS layer for rare communities. And thank you very much. Okay, questions? And Julie, too, maybe you can come up and answer.